Dream big, fail fast, and never, ever give up, because every stage of our journey can be challenging. You have to have real belief in your future potential to keep plowing through all of those no's.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Terri Duhon, who is an award-winning educator, TEDx speaker, board director and speaker, who has over 25 years of experience in financial markets. She wrote the book, How the Trading Floor Really Works, founded her own financial markets training firm, and is an associate fellow at the Said Business School in Oxford. She sits on the board of Morgan Stanley International, where she is chair of the risk committee, and also holds a number of additional independent director roles. Welcome, Terri. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with your background. Where did you grow up? What did you study? And how did you come to enter the world of trading and investing?
Wow, that's a lot, all in one. I grew up in Louisiana, which feels about as far from Wall Street and the city of London as you could possibly think. It's almost another world. I grew up in Louisiana. My daddy's family are Cajun from Louisiana, and my mama's family is from Texas. So very deep South stuff. I went to university at MIT and I studied math. And from there, Wall Street was calling. In the 90s, they were looking for anyone with a technical or analytical degree, because derivatives were just, in a massive growth phase. And I ended up going to JP Morgan on Wall Street, trading interest rate derivatives, and then eventually moving into the credit derivative space, which was very, very, very young, helping to build that market really more than anything.
And let's then look at the arc of your career. So you worked in established firms, you then set up your own firm. Can you tell us a little bit about your thinking process behind that and what that taught you?
Yeah, when I first started at JP Morgan, I grew up so differently, it felt, from everybody else that was working with me at JP Morgan. It felt like their parents wore suits too. And that wasn't my parents. It felt like they knew what banking was. And clearly, when I told my family that I was going to work on Wall Street, they thought I was going to be a teller in a bank. They didn't really understand. And I felt super foreign. And when I first got to JP Morgan and I was in the training program, I remember meeting this guy very senior guy, and he had a watch to show for his 25 years of service to JP Morgan. And I almost hyperventilated because I thought, oh my goodness, 25 years, he's longer than I've been alive. And I can't see myself in one place for that long. And what was clear is that I spent 10 years ultimately on the trading floor. That's my big corporate career. But it was clear after about 8 years that I needed to do something new and different. So I sort of say that every 10 years I'm on a reinvention gig, which is after 10 years in the big corporate, I decided to become an entrepreneur. And then after 10 years as an entrepreneur, I decided to build my portfolio career. And if we're very honest, you said more than 25 years. I'm getting very close to 30 years out of university. And so in a few years, I'm going to be rethinking what's my next step. How am I going to reinvent myself then? So for me, it's just the fun of learning and doing something new and adding new skills and figuring out, how I can maximize future opportunities.
And I do want to go back to your experience on the trading floor, but we'll come to that in a second. Now, in your portfolio career phase, this current tenure phase, what do you seek to bring to those roles? Because you have quite high-level positions on risk committees, etc., which at large established firms are serious business. So what do you bring? And what do you think makes a good director or chair in these roles?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I had no idea initially, I'll be totally honest. I was sure that I could add value to a board before I sat on a board, but I wasn't actually, if I'm very honest, entirely sure what that meant. And I went on a bit of a journey of discovery. And what I've learned is that sitting on a board is about, it's two key things: challenge and support. my job is non-executive. It means I'm not an employee of the firm. I'm not there to do the job. I'm there to challenge the people that are doing the job to bring as much diversity of perspective to the table as possible, and then to support as they do that job. And so people say things like, oh, the board owns strategy. Well, that doesn't mean that the board goes away and designs the strategy for a firm. It means that the executives, the people who run the firm, go away and come up with a strategy. They then present it to the board members, and the board members kick it around. So if you are able to bring a critical eye to things that you hear, and you're able to ask probing questions in a diplomatic way, and you can bring a tremendous amount to the table because everybody's background is so different. Everybody brings some diversity of perspective. So you just have to leverage that in the room.
And it's interesting because that's exactly why I asked this question, because I think many people in these situations are on similar voyages of discovery. There is no playbook, there is no manual. In particular, I'd love to ask about your chair positions, because you must have seen a lot of chairs in action. Now you're doing that role yourself. How do you think a chair is at their most effective?
So that's a great question. So I've observed some chairs, and this isn't necessarily in the boardroom, a chair of a committee or a chair of a task force or a working group. I've observed some chairs who don't provide enough direction and then allow people to repeat themselves. I'm sure everybody sat on a committee or in a meeting where you're discussing a really complex issue, and one person says something and it's really interesting, and then 10 minutes later, somebody else repeats it. And you think, oh, wait, hang on, we've said this already. So how is that value add? Because I sort of, as a participant, I think, gosh, this is very frustrating because it feels like we're circling around an issue rather than moving forward. And as a chair, I feel that it's really important to get everybody's perspective on the table when something critical is being discussed. And it's really important to make sure everybody feels that their opinion and their perspective is valued. And that's part of my job. And then the next part of my job is to give people a bit of guidance. Guys, this is what we're talking about here. Our job is to do X, not Y, to make sure that we don't stray off piste a bit. And then my job, when we've debated something long enough, and we're now starting to repeat ourselves, my job is to stop the debate and come up with some next step. It doesn't mean I have to conclude, it doesn't mean I have to have the answer at that point. It means I have to have identified either we need to talk about this some more. So let's put a small group together and talk about these few issues and then come back and present to the committee. Or let's get the execs to go away and work on this a bit longer because there's clearly a lot here. Or sounds like we could make a decision now, so let's do it. Where would we land on this issue? And so my job as a chair is to move us forward when those big issues come to the table. That's one part of the job. The next part of the job is to make sure that the right issues are coming to the table, clearly. And that's kind of critical, and that happens outside of the boardroom. That happens outside of the risk committee. It means I sit down with all of the main key people who present regular reports, and I make sure that those are the right reports. I make sure that the information in those reports is relevant and helps us in the conversation. I make sure that I understand what the issues are at the moment, and I bring those out as relevant in the meetings.
Well, that is a wonderful mini masterclass. Thank you. I'll certainly be taking notes for that. Let's move to the issue of diversity, because I know you're active now on the Women in Boards movement and efforts to get more diversity onto boards. Where do you think we are, perhaps, let's say at the board level for now, in terms of diversity? And are you satisfied with the progress we've seen?
Oh, no, of course not. How could I be? We're 50% of the population. Broadly, and we're not 50% anywhere on any board, in any executive team, anywhere. And I mean, there might be one or two exceptions, but they're massive exceptions at the moment. So no, I'm not satisfied with the progress. Am I pleased that we seem to have more energy and more focus on this? Absolutely. Am I pleased that we've hit some key milestones? Yes. So, for example, in the UK, getting to 30%, I believe, and I'm going to get this wrong, but getting to 30% on the FTSE 100 and the FTSE 250 is a great milestone. Excellent. Now let's get to 40%. And now let's look at the executive teams. And now let's do this and now let's do that. There's a lot of work we have to do. But I can see that we've made progress. Great. I think we're moving too slowly. I'd like to see more. But I also know there's a lot of focus on this. So I want to praise all the hard work that's going into it. But I also, it's my 18-year-old is doing A-levels at the moment. So I want to praise all the hard work, but I also want to kick him in the butt and tell him to work harder. You know what I mean?
A common sentiment, I think, down to that generation. But that's really encouraging. I think some of those statistics you gave. And yes, we have to celebrate progress, even if we're not there. It's a journey. I'd like to go back now to diversity. And maybe if you could paint a picture for us as to what the trading floor was like for you. In the world of finance, it's often the trading floor that may be considered kind of the epicenter of some of the imbalance in gender and maybe some of the behaviors that might not have been as inclusive. Can you paint a picture of diversity throughout your career, maybe starting at the beginning and how it evolved? And maybe if you could give us a kind of a scorecard on the industry itself now today, as opposed to the board level.
So that's a really interesting question. So I'll start with your initial question about the trading floor. So the first thing I would say is something I alluded to earlier, is that I didn't feel so different or unique because I was a woman. I felt different and unique because I came from a much different background than everyone around me. And I came from a very rural, much less wealthy background than everyone around me. And I felt very out of fish out of water. It wasn't because I was a woman. And yes, being a woman was relatively unique, but remember I was at MIT studying math. There were only 10% female in the math department at the time. So being a lone woman in a room wasn't that odd for me when I got to the trading floor. But I definitely felt that my background set me apart. That was a bigger difference for me. When I first started on the trading floor, I looked around and I thought, okay, so there are a few senior women here and they were amazing and super supportive. And I looked at my analyst program and I thought, okay, well, they're 30% female here. So in 30 years' time, we'll be at the top of these organizations and there'll be 50% coming up beneath us. And that has not been the trajectory at all. And one of the challenges has been that in particular parts of the financial services industry, we do not attract women or many minorities. And so a lot of women and minorities self-select out before they get to the recruitment process. And so we struggle to get even 50% and a representative minority group into the recruiting process. That's part of the issue. Of course, after that, you then have all the biases, conscious and unconscious, that mean that our retention issues are pretty significant as well. Once we get women and minorities into certain areas of financial services, we struggle to retain. And those are things we're all working on. Again, we've made a lot of progress. We have a lot more to go. But if we're very honest and we call out the areas where women in particular struggle, and it's not always the case for minorities, so I'll separate women and minorities for this particular point. It's the trading floor, it's trading, it is M&A, and it is portfolio management. So if you look at those three areas, so a lot of financial services firms will tell you that they're 50% female and they have representative, proportionate amounts of minorities. But when you look at the gender pay gap, for example, it tells you where those women and minorities are sitting. And on the whole, they're sitting in more junior roles and they're sitting in more support roles. And they're not sitting in the roles as much where they get paid the big bucks. And that's a big problem still today.
That's an excellent point. And we're in the business of gathering evidence as to why these pay gaps exist, why these gaps exist, why this underrepresentation persists. From your vantage point at Said, can you see whether women are entering the pipeline in the way you'd like, and whether they're taking those courses or maybe learning to take risk in the way that they need in order to go into some of these positions?
Yeah, again, another great question. So I don't have very recent stats, but I have stats. I have anecdotal stats from about 5 to 10 years ago, which was that what I could see. So the Said School is an MBA program. It's a business school. So it's MBAs and MFEs. So it's not an undergraduate degree. So that's at Oxford University. So I could see when I first started lecturing at Said, my understanding was that the intake was around 30% female. And I did lectures at lots of other MBA programs as well. And the numbers were roughly similar. Now, I know that the numbers have gone up. I don't know if they're 50-50 yet. But even at MIT, when I was at MIT 30 years ago, it was 30% female. Today, it's 45% female. So it's moved significantly, but it's not 50-50. But even with that 30% female, at the time, so 10 years ago, I was the only female finance lecturer, and I had a course called Financial Market Trading. And it was a trading strategies course. And I had to cap the course at 100 students. There was a lot of interest in it. And I got about 5 women. So 5% female compared to the even 30% female population at the time, which said to me that women were self-selecting out of those sorts of kind of trading floor classes, even though I was the only female finance lecturer at the time. And I was sort of hopeful that that would attract more women, but it didn't. And my observation was, and still to some extent today, is that the financial services brand is a difficult one. It looks like it has more male characteristics than female characteristics, and it's less appealing, and it's one that we need to put some energy into.
Excellently said. I couldn't sum it up. And it's interesting. I'm thinking about the brand, and we think of the terms of, a pull strategy or a push strategy. It seems to have a pretty effective pull strategy for certain segments of the population. And because of that, it's never really had to adopt a push strategy to get that inclusion they want. And I agree. I've spoken with other academics, and they've shown me the same statistics in terms of self-selection into seminars and courses that may involve, say, risk-taking. It is a problem. I hope we're making a dent in it somehow, but it definitely is a problem. So thanks for sharing that. Just wanted to go back now to some personal reflections, as you've had such an extraordinary career with these different phases, as you mentioned. Were there any key people across the course of that career who were mentors to you, or maybe had a significant influence in your approach?
So I had some great people that I worked with. And this is the thing that I always say to women and minorities, which is, we should be careful that we don't judge, because you'll be surprised at where support comes from. And it's not always going to be fellow women or minorities. It's going to be across the board. And it's important that we're as open-minded on our journey as everybody else is, because I've had some incredible support along the way. There hasn't been one person necessarily on the whole journey with me. There were some amazing people supporting me on the trading floor. And that some of those carried on, in the next phase, which was my entrepreneurial career. And then, there were some amazing people when I wrote my book that supported me. And then there were amazing people on my journey to get into the boardroom. And they've all been different, and they've all, I'm sure, had their own reasons for helping. Maybe it was paying it forward. Maybe it was just, feeling that the more senior you get, the more critical it is that you help those that are more junior and on on an earlier part of their journey. So I wouldn't say any one person sticks out, but I would say it's been an incredibly diverse group.
And in terms of any words of wisdom, creed or motto, or maybe words to live by that you have learned either from these people or developed on your own, can you share anything there?
Yeah, look, I speak at a lot of high schools and trying to, particularly state schools, trying to encourage, motivate, inspire. And, what I normally say to people, and it's funny because it applies not just to the school children I speak to or the students I speak to, they're not children at that age, but it also applies it's as relevant to everyone is, dream big, fail fast, and never, ever give up, because every stage of our journey can be challenging. Whatever you're looking to do next, dream big. Why not? What's the point otherwise, right? And fail fast, learn from those failures, learn every no gets you closer to the yes that you need, that you're looking for. And embrace the failures. They're your best opportunity to learn, but never, ever give up. The failures are tough, right? They can be really hard and really embarrassing and sometimes super cringy. And I've got some terrible, awful, cringy events in my background, but use your community around you to keep you going and give you energy. Just don't give up. It's whatever you want to achieve. It's achievable. I promise.
You are such a beacon of success and I think achievement at this stage of your career. I'm just putting myself in the shoes of some of these high school students, the college students, the Said students who maybe are getting those rejection letters. Can you share any one or two of your own setbacks that you learned from, that maybe these cringy moments or sometimes something that didn't work out?
I've got loads of these, right? And I try to talk about them a lot because I don't want anyone to look at me and think, oh my goodness, what she's done is not achievable. I want to make sure people think, oh, okay, she's human. We're all human. And one of the challenges I have with very successful people when they talk about their background is that they often focus on the highs, which I think is it's so misleading for the rest of us because it makes them look infallible. And I want everyone to believe that what I've done is absolutely doable. So we have to talk about those failures. We have to talk about the most embarrassing interview that I had at MIT trying to get onto Wall Street, where I was kicked out after 15 minutes in front of the whole line of students waiting to get in to have their interview, or the time I was fired on the trading floor at JP Morgan. I was rehired on the same day, but I was fired. And I was just very lucky. I was sort of in the right place at the right time to get rehired. One of my businesses, I started 3 businesses. Well, I tried to start 3 businesses, and one was such a failure. The timing was so wrong. But even the business that's been the most successful, I'm embarrassed by because I didn't invest when I should have. And I can look back and think, gosh, I should have taken more risk. What was wrong with me? But I was afraid. And, for me, that's a failure. The trying to get onto boards. Oh my goodness. My transition from being an entrepreneur to being a board member was incredibly challenging. I was younger than most board members at the time. And I didn't have board experience, and there's that funny catch-22. You have to be on a board to get on a board. And I was trying to get people to take me seriously, and it was incredibly tough. And those were tough days. Everything was a no or just outright laughter for a while. And that's tough to deal with. You have to have real belief in your future potential to keep plowing through all of those no's. And look, I get my Said students used to call me and they'd say, look, I've applied to 100 things and I haven't. And I say, apply to 100 more. I promise you're going to get there. And they all do. They all eventually get something. They call me up and they say, thank you for, just pushing me forward, because I needed a little more energy to go forward. And it's tough. That's why you use your community. That's why you have a community of people around you. You can phone a friend who tells you you're awesome and you just keep doing this and you're going to get there, right? And we all need that backup, that support on our journey.
Well, thank you so much, Terri. This has been a wonderful conversation. As I mentioned, you are a beacon, I think a beacon of clear thinking and honesty in our industry. Thank you for being so generous with your time, with the younger generation and with us here. As I said, you really have given us a masterclass in what it takes to be a successful board member. And thank you for letting us join you on your journey of discovery.
Thanks very much for having me. Always great to chat.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.